Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video.
Here. What we're going to talk about today is some of the addendums, the amendments, the advisories, a couple other of the, subsequent forms that you guys use on a regular basis. Some that are maybe not used 100% properly, some that aren't used and should be. And I just wanted to kind of get into those. So it'll give us a class to cover today and probably next Thursday as we finish out our year on the contract trainings. So again, these are forms that you're probably going to use often. Some you're not using and should, and maybe some that you're not using properly or other people are not using properly. And I want to make sure that you guys are aware of the correct usage and, when and why they're required. So let me get started with the first one and share my screen. All right, so what you guys should be looking at is an addendum, right? Just a regular old addendum. The reason I wanted to start here is that I think what happens is with addendum specifically is you as agents collectively, I don't mean you, the people that are on this class, but you as agents collectively use these too much, use them too often, use them for everything when it comes to a change, when it comes to an addition. That's not what they're for. Okay, so if I'm making a change for some reason, like I am adding a buyer, I'm removing a buyer, I'm asking for a credit, we're making some kind of a negotiation change to the transaction that we had already agreed upon. That's not what this is for. There's another form, and that's going to be the next one that we're going to talk about. This is an addendum. This is solely for added space. That's it. When I run out of space, or if I have to, if the space that is provided in whatever the contract is, the purchase agreement, the listing agreement, the month-to-month rental, the transfer disclosure, whatever it is, this is just for additional space, right? Now, it is enforceable. So let's clarify. If I do use this, even though it's not the proper form to use, let's say that I am requesting a credit. So I write addendum number 1 to the purchase agreement, which is default, and I say, buyer and seller agree to a closing cost credit of, $5,000, and everybody signs it, and and we agree to it, and we send that to escrow. That is enforceable. Don't get me wrong. It's just not proper, because what happens a lot of times with addendums is we don't agree on the terms of what's added to that addendum, whether it be an assignment to a new buyer, an assignment to remove a buyer, credits, changes in sales price, things of that nature, changes in our time periods, changes in our contingency period, like those kind of changes. If we don't agree to those changes or that request for the change in an addendum, this addendum is alive forever. So let's, for example, addendum number 1 in that context that we had just mentioned where I'm asking for a credit. So I write addendum number 1, send it to the seller saying seller agrees to pay buyer a $5,000 closing cost credit. Okay. My buyer signs it and we send it to the seller. And the seller says, no, we don't agree to the terms of that. There's nowhere on here for them to reject it. So for eternity, with this one signed addendum, it kind of lives out there waiting for a signature from the seller to either agree to it or not, right? So the problem that we run into with that is that if I send this out and then let's say I ask for the credit for $5,000 and the seller comes back and says, no, here's addendum number 2. I'm going to give you a credit of $2,000, right? And then the buyer says, well, no, I need the credit of $5,000. So I'm asking you. So I send another addendum. So now we're at addendum 3 requesting $5,000. And we get to now that third one. The seller says, okay, well, now you're asking for 5. Now I only want to give you 1, not the 2 that I originally offered on an addendum number 2. And then the buyer says, well, wait a minute, I want the 2. And the buyer signs that addendum number 2 that said it was a $2,000 credit that was already signed by the seller. That's now an enforceable document. It's been agreed upon now. It's been fully executed by both parties. So that's the danger in this, because now the seller said, well, no, I don't want to give 5. I don't want to give 2. I'm going to give you 1 because you keep asking. That 1 is now floating out there forever and it hasn't been agreed upon. The 5 is out there floating forever and it hasn't been agreed upon. And now the 2 has, that is the middle of 3 different amendments that are addendums that were being negotiated. So it does get confusing. And there's been so many transactions where escrow looks at it and to be honest, it becomes the agent's fault that it becomes confusing, is because they misnumber addendums, right? So if I have addendum number 1 to a purchase agreement, any other addendum following that is addendum 2, 3, 4, right? Because it's to the purchase agreement. But if I have an addendum number 1 for the purchase agreement, and then I need to make an addendum for the transfer disclosure statement, now I have an addendum number 1 for the transfer disclosure. And sometimes what happens is agents just, hey, this was addendum number 1 in our transaction, so any addendum is addendum number 2. Any addendum following that is addendum number 3, and it gets confusing. So it'll say like addendum number 2, and they'll write transaction transfer disclosure. Escrows will require, well, where's addendum number 1 to the transfer disclosure? And there isn't one. It doesn't exist. So you got to be careful with the numbering when you use these addendums. Plus, like I said, they float around forever. And so if I have an addendum number 1 that's requesting a credit and that one doesn't get accepted, and then I have an addendum number 2 with a different amount of credit, and then I have an addendum number 3 with a different amount of credit, and I don't reference addendums 1 and 2 in addendum 3, escrow is going to say, well, wait a minute, we have agreed on addendum 3 to the purchase agreement, which is the credit for whatever the amount is. Where's addendums 1 and 2? I need those for the file because those are additions to the purchase agreement. So it becomes really complicated because they're not fully executed. How can I turn them in? So addendums, just remember, guys, are solely for space. That's it. I need extra space. I need to put something in there. That's it. That's all I'm doing. I think there's echoing back into my microphone. So if anybody's in the office and is playing the recording on the speaker out loud, can you either put headphones on or turn it down considerably, because it's echoing back. I can hear myself speaking and I think it's going through the microphone. So I apologize to anybody if the sound was weird. Okay. Questions about addendums before I move on to the form that we should be using more often than not. Anybody? Any questions? All right, let's move on then. Here we go. And this is what we should be using. So in those things that we were speaking about where it's I'm making some kind of change or asking for a credit or changing a sales price, this is the form that we should be using. Okay, amendment of existing agreement terms. And the reason why this is the form that we should be using is because it has an active acceptance or rejection. So going back to that same scenario that we were talking about where I'm requesting a credit from the seller as a buyer, I send it on this amendment of existing agreement terms. I said, seller, I need a $5,000 credit on amendment of existing agreement terms number 1, right? So I send that. The seller says, nope, I don't want it. And they initial here that it's not been accepted by the seller, that they're not accepting that $5,000 credit. Now they want to make an offer of giving me $2,000. they go amendment of existing agreement terms number 2, because it's an amendment to the purchase agreement, so it would be number 2. They put in that we would put to do a $2,000 credit, right? And then they sign it, send it to me. Now, as buyer, I either accept it or I say, no, the 2,000 is not enough, and I then initial the rejection. So now I send a third amendment of existing agreement terms saying I need a $3,000 credit, for example. And then the seller says, you know what, I'm good with 3,000, I'll accept it. And they sign and accept it. Now I have an amendment number 3. In that original scenario with an addendum, the escrow is going to want to see all 3 of those, but you can't, because those aren't part of the transaction because they weren't fully executed. Now this, amendments number 1 and amendment number 2, would be part of the transaction because they are executed. They were rejected here. So you were able to turn in those amendments to escrow showing this was the fully executed one. We have now a literal timeline that says this was the request, this was the rejection, this was the response, this was the rejection, here was the final request, and here was the acceptance. Does that make sense to you guys? So we'll never have that issue of this amendment lasts forever, because even if there is no acceptance or rejection, there is a expiration date, just like a purchase agreement. So if I make you a request on an amendment of existing agreement terms asking for that credit or asking for that sales price reduction, and you don't respond in 3 days, that amendment is no longer valid anyhow. So there's not like, it doesn't have that same danger of an old addendum or old amendment being signed and being fully executed that wasn't the terms that were agreed to. Charlie, go ahead and unmute. You have your hand up.
Hey, Kyle, so if no one initials right here where it says amendment not accepted, does that mean that it's accepted?
No, it needs to be signed in the acceptance to be accepted. If it's neither signed nor initialed in the rejection, then it expires after 3 days. It's no longer valid.
It expires after 3 days if nobody
Yes. If
signs
nobody
it.
signs it or initials the rejection.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And Danny, you unmuted for a moment. Did you have a question?
Yeah, Kyle, sorry about that. I'm kind of driving at the same time
That's okay.
I'm talking. So,
No problem.
so basically similar to a counter offer in that perspective where it expires after 3 days. So with that being said, are those the only 3 terms that constitute this particular contract? The changing the price, giving a credit.
I mean, it could be anything that is a change to the original agreement. Anything. Now, for example, like we had a transaction earlier this week where a buyer's agent, and they did it on an addendum, but we'll do it here on an amendment of existing agreement terms. A buyer's agent sent in to the seller stating that there was a change in buyer, right? So they wrote in here, seller is to be aware that, buyer Jane Smith is no longer part of the transaction. Okay, that's fine, because that is a change. This is not quite the proper form for it, but it's okay. You can do this, and then in addition to, you'd have to do an amendment, an assignment of agreement addendum, which we're going to get into today also. So you'd have to do both. So really the right way to put this together would be on the amendment of existing agreement terms. Buyer and seller agree that buyer Jane Smith is no longer part of transaction. Seller agrees to sign attached assignment of agreement addendum, right? So you'd have 2 forms to handle that. But this would be the proper way to do it, not an amendment. Not an addendum. It would be this amendment would be the way to do that, make that change. So if it's, time periods, you have an extension of time agreement that you can, or amendment that you can do, and we're going to talk about that today. So there's a lot of terms that are going to change that have very specific forms that work for it, but a change to the agreement, whatever that agreement is, if it's changing the fundamental structure of that agreement, this is the form that you should use for that. So whatever comes up. unless there's a specific form for it, like an extension of time or an assignment of the assignment of agreement addendum, and we'll talk about those as we go. But again, I just want you guys to get away from the addendum form, that blank addendum, because it's not meant for negotiating. It's just meant for housekeeping, really, like making sure that there's room in the form to address the term that you want to address, whatever that form may be, whether it's a disclosure or a contract or a counter offer, any of those things. Okay, I hope that helps. So just like we did, just like the addendums work, it's just a blank space. That's it. And then it's who's proposing and what the expiration date is. And now by default, it's 3 days after. You could change the time and the date if you wanted to down here. Whoever's proposing it signs here, whether that be buyer or seller. The acceptance is either here, whoever's accepting it, the other party, and then the rejection, the initials. That's it. This is the form that you guys should be using way more than addendums. I see the addendums so much, and I hear the agents, and I get it. It's just this didn't exist, right, for years. This amendment of existing, it was the addendums was what we used for this. This is a relatively newer form. It's not brand new, obviously. I think it's like this one was revised in December of 2021, but it existed. I think it started in 2019. Okay, so it's been around for a while. It's not something that we're using like we should, and I think it's way more important that we start to make sure that we're making a habit of, most of the time, this is the form we should be using, not an addendum. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions before I move on to the next one? All right. So this is another one that where you guys are probably using relatively frequently. This is the additional signature addendum. So we know that purchase agreements and listing agreements only have a spot for 2 buyers or 2 sellers to sign on the actual purchase agreement or listing agreement. Even though you could put 4 names in, or 4 names on the listing, 4 names on the purchase, even though you can type those names in, the spot for signatures only exists for 2. There's only space for 2. And I know it's a lot easier, especially with digital signatures, to just throw those signature lines into, right? I think most of you guys are using DocuSign or Digital Ink or some equivalent of digital signatures, and it's easy. Like on a purchase agreement, if I have 3 or 4 buyers, I can just add those extra signature lines. But that's not the proper way to do it, right? This exists for that reason. So whenever I always think, like, yes, sometimes there's going to be shortcuts that we're going to take, but when a form exists, we should be using the form for the purpose that it's intended. So for listing agreements, for purchase agreements, or any other agreement that you may be putting in where you need those additional signatures, you're going to put this in, and you're going to put the property address, and you're going to put between, if you have the buyer and seller, like you already have a buyer in mind. Like with a listing agreement, you don't, so you're only going to do the one seller here. You're not going to have anybody you're going to have the broker's name in here for a listing agreement. You're only going to put the names for the seller of the people who are not signing the listing agreement. Okay? So let me repeat. Let's say that we have Jerry Smith, John Smith, Jane Smith, and June Smith are all signing. The 4 of them are signing. Well, let's say Jerry and John sign on the listing agreement. Then the names that are going to go here for the seller spot on these lines are going to be June and Jane. Only those 2 names. You're not going to put all the names on there, just those 2 names of the people that are signing. That's it. The broker, you don't need additional signatures for the broker, but you can put Century 21 All Stars in here for the broker because that's who they're making the agreement with. Additional signer, the seller, you check off, you put their name in, June or Jane, whoever you want to you put first, and then they're going to sign it. These initials right here are either I agree or I do not agree to the liquidated damages and the dispute resolutions that are in that contract, right? So in a purchase agreement, they would initial, yes, I'm agreeing to liquidated damages, and I'm agreeing to dispute resolution. In a listing contract, you don't need to do that. Okay. And then you would do that for both buyers. This allows you to put 3 additional buyers or sellers to the contract. Now, if you have more than that, so if you have more than 5 buyers or sellers, you're going to need more signatures, additional signature addendums. It gets a little clumsy. But that's what I want you guys to start thinking about, is using this. This is what it's for. Now, the one thing I will tell you is that for disclosures, because if you have all these people and you have, 3 or 4 buyers, 5 or 6 buyers, sellers or buyers, and you're going through a TDS, an SPQ, lead-based paint, an NHD report, you got all of these disclosures you have to go through. With digital signatures, even if you're doing wet signatures, if they acknowledge a disclosure on the actual disclosure, even though it doesn't call for them, and you don't use the additional signature addendum, I'm good with it. Like for us on the listing side, because I can't control other brokers. So on the listing side, let's say you have everybody acknowledge, even all 5 of them acknowledge the TDS, the SPQ. I'm good with it in our office because it's on the actual form. They've acknowledged that they've read it, even though there's not a space. I get it. The right way, I got to tell you, the right way 100% is you need an additional signature addendum for every form that those buyers or sellers have to sign, that there is not a space for them on that actual form. That's the right way. But again, disclosures, I will okay you guys making those additional signature lines and fixing it on the, signing it on the actual form. I'm okay with that. Other brokers may not. They may require it. So if you're on the buyer side and you have done the additional signature addendum for your purchase agreement and for everything else, and they request it for the other forms, don't fight them, just do it. Right? If you're the buyer side, don't fight them. There's no point in fighting them. Okay. Questions about additional signature addendums? Anybody? All right. This is moving faster than I thought it was going to. Here we go. Kyle, good morning. On this form, can't we just identify disclosures in the other? No. Not all disclosures. You can't just say that they're signing all the disclosures on one form. You can't do that. You can't do that. Because now what happens is this. Let's say that I just, in this other form right here, and that's a good question, Virginia. Thanks for bringing that up, because I'm guessing people have done this. In this section where it says other, I just write disclosures, like every disclosure, and then they sign it. Who's to prove that they reviewed that any of the specific disclosures? Right? Even if I listed all of the disclosures in that other, TDS, SPQ, lead-based paint, NHD report, all these, and this is their signature line, no way. I can't prove that they did it. I can't say, hey, they looked at all of them because I just have one blanket signature for 10 forms. That doesn't work. It's either got to be they acknowledge it on the disclosure itself, or you've got to have one of these additional signature addendums for every form that you are substituting. Okay, you can't do just blanket every disclosure is signed by this one form. That won't work. But good question. I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm sure that somebody else had that question, or somebody's done it and now they know they shouldn't have. Can the initial, so you're talking about, like, for example, a listing agreement, at the bottom of each page, it has seller's initials and they initial that they've seen. Yeah, that's not that big a deal. All that initial is that they're confirming they received a copy of that page. That's it. It's not like they're agreeing to the terms of that page. They're just saying, it's like, oh yeah, I got this page. Yes, I saw this page. Yes, I saw this page. Their signature is what counts at the end. So even if these additional signature people, you don't have their initials on each page, it doesn't matter if they're on there. As long as they sign that they've gotten a copy of the contract, which is what the signature is really saying. So, that initials is not that big a deal. So you want to have them initial, go for it. They don't initial it, not a big deal. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right, let's move on then. And the next thing we're going to look at, since we just talked about, and just so you know, that additional signature addendum cannot be used to add or remove a buyer or seller from the transaction. So, assignment of agreement addendum. We talked about it with that amendment of existing agreement terms. This is how we add, subtract a buyer, or assign it all completely, totally to some other entity or a person. Okay, that's what this form is for. That's what you use this for, not an addendum. You shouldn't do it on an amendment. You should do it on this. And if you're going to do it on an amendment where you're trying to get their acknowledgement and their agreement, you got to reference that this is also included, okay? That they're signing this also. Following terms and conditions are hereby incorporated and made part of the purchase agreement or other agreement dated. It's usually going to be purchase agreement because that's what we're doing. We're signing a purchase. Dated the date of the purchase agreement between the buyer and seller, whoever those buyers are. Now, let's say that, Alvaro and I are the purchasers, and we're removing Alvaro from the purchase. That's what we're going to do with this assignment. We're still going to put my name and Alvaro's name here as the buyers, because at this moment, we are the buyers, okay? So just so you guys are aware, we're going to walk through this so you see how it works. So as buyers, the current buyers are myself and Alvaro, where both of our names are going in there. The seller's name is going in there. In consideration of the covenants contained herein, buyer hereby assigns to assignee, and assignee accepts the assignment, subject to seller's consent, if required by the agreement, which the agreement does. It says, in the purchase agreement, I as buyer have 17 days to request an assignment. The seller has no obligation to accept that assignment unless we've put into the agreement that they know that we're doing an assignment. Of all or partial interest of buyer's rights, that's what I'm assigning. Title and interest under the agreement included without limitation to the right to title and interest in any deposit or down payment upon the following terms and conditions. So what it means is, let's say that Alvaro and I put our deposit in, but now we're removing Alvaro, and they agree to it. The way the assignment works is when we assign it to just me, I have the right to that whole deposit. To get it back, it's going to get paid to me. I have the right to use it. I have the right to get clear title. It doesn't change any of the agreement and the rights that we had as buyers, as partners, as I do as a solo purchaser now. Okay. So partial assignment is adding a buyer. That's not what we're doing right now. Buyer is adding the assignee's name below to the agreement and granting to such assignees a partial interest in the agreement. It's not what we're doing. We're removing one. Total assignment is when there's completely new buyers. So let's say that Alvaro and I were both leaving the transaction and we were going to assign it to Araceli and Chet. Then that would be a total assignment. Or in a case where I'm purchasing it on my own, it's just Kyle purchasing the property, but I decide I want to assign it to my corporation. So we have, the Estrada Corporation. That would also be a total assignment because that's a separate entity from me, even though I am a partner in that. So that would be a total assignment where it was going from me as an individual to my corporation. What we're doing in the example that we were discussing, where I have myself and Alvaro, and we're going to remove Alvaro from the purchase, is called an other assignment, replacing a buyer, and at least one original buyer is remaining, okay, or deleting a buyer. So if I was taking Alvaro off and adding a different buyer, or we're deleting him altogether, as long as one of the original buyers, so let's say we have 4 original buyers and we want to take off 3 of them, that's okay because one original buyer is still remaining. Let's say that we have 4 buyers and we want to replace 2 with 2 other ones. That's okay because one of the original buyers is still remaining. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to write Alvaro's name here. We're going to check this box and we're going to put Alvaro on here that he's being removed. Buyer's being removed. You see that? Is assigning all of that buyer's interest in the agreement to the new or remaining buyers assignee's name below. So in this case, it's only me. So we're only going to type my name in there. But if, like in that other example where there was 3 or 4 buyers, we would type all of the remaining buyers' names in there, the assignees. Okay? Following? Questions. Let me stop there. Questions, so that I know that this stuff can get confusing. But this is how this works. Removing, adding, changing, right? This is the form that you have to use. Questions? Anybody? All right, you guys all got it? You all understand it? There's 41 of you on here, and I'm going to keep track of who it is because when you ask me how this form works, I'm going to remind you. All right, so we put all the assignees' names in. That's how it works, right? So it was me and Alvaro. We removed Alvaro. We're just keeping me, so I'm the assignee. So we're taking it from Kyle and Alvaro are assigning it just to Kyle. That's what's happening. So that's going to be my name. I'm just myself, so I don't have to check this. But if the assignee were my trust, then I would check this box and say assignee is buyer's own trust or a wholly owned entity of buyer, right? So we were talking about that complete, the total assignment. I would check that box because if I was assigning it into my corporation, it's my corporation. So now it gets to the prior documents. Assignee shall initial the first page of each document and deliver to seller all of the transaction documents previously approved by buyer, including but not limited to all contract documents, inspection reports, pamphlets, advisories, disclosures within the time specified below. Unless otherwise agreed, assignee acknowledges that all timeframes in the agreement remain the same and no additional time shall be provided for any matter, including but not limited to investigation, review of documents, or close of escrow. So what's happening is we're saying by making this assignment, we're not changing any of the timelines. The timelines that existed, when we're going to close, when we're going to remove contingencies, when we're going to do inspections, are all exactly the same as when it was our original purchase agreement. That doesn't change. So then what it says is that, hey, by default, the assignee has received all of the documents that were already taken care of, right? So let's say that Alvaro and I alone, or Alvaro and I together, had already signed all the disclosures. We'd already done our all inspections. We'd done everything. Now what we're saying is the assignee has already gotten it. So I have, because I'm the original buyer already. I'm just removing a buyer. So what I just need to do is just make a second set of initials on the front page of each one of those things, just to initial it and say, yes, we have it. Most of the time when it's the signee like that, where one of the original buyers who's already signed and initial everything is staying on, you don't need to do that. It would be different if I was switching it over to a corporation or something. I'd have to then do that. Or I check the box and say, no, I haven't given them to the assignee yet. Go ahead, Charlie. What was your question?
So Kyle, you cannot, can you assign the contract to somebody else after 17 days?
Sure.
After it's accepted?
Okay. You can do anything as long as both parties agree. So let's say that we get to day 17 and I haven't requested an assignment and we pass day 17 and I say, you know what, I need to assign it, and I make this request anyway. I do this assignment of agreement addendum and I send it to the seller. The seller doesn't have any obligation now to even acknowledge, to go along with it. Now, if the seller says, yeah, I don't care, they can sign it and the assignment is legal. So the timelines are just saying, hey, this is how much time you have to do these things. And after that, we don't even have to entertain it. But nothing says that the seller has to agree to it. So even if you do it prior to the 17 days, seller doesn't have to agree. If you do it after the 17 days, seller doesn't have to agree, but they could agree. They could. They could still, after day 17, they could do it the day before you close escrow if they wanted to. If they wanted to assign it and the seller was okay with it, you could do that. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, let's move on. Pre-qualification or pre-approval. Assignee has been pre-qualified or pre-approved by buyer's lender as per the agreement, and a copy is attached. That's if changing lenders or anything like that, or we're just making, like, for example, we were buying it together, we were approved together on our loan, now he's gone, I have to show proof that I qualify on my own to still purchase the property. That's it. That's all they're asking for. Go ahead, Zuli. Yes.
Hi, Kyle.
Hi.
In regards to the contingencies, when the sale is assigned to someone else, the time is still the same or resets, or what happens with that?
Still the same.
So
Stays the same. It doesn't extend. They don't get more time. Nothing changes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Time to return assignee, initial to prior documents, initial copies of all prior documents attached. So the default is, with my request for the assignment, I've already given you everything that's been initialed that's required to be initialed. Or I can say, hey, three days after, okay? Or three, if 1E is checked, right? Delivery and return of prior documents not required because the assignee is buyer's own trust or wholly owned buyer. So remember we talked about, hey, I'm assigning it to my corporation. I don't have to give any new documents because it's my trust, okay? Jenny, can the new assignee request new terms? No, they cannot. No, they absolutely cannot. They have to agree to the terms that already exist. Effect of failure to return or attach documents. Seller, after first delivering a notice to buyer to perform, may cancel this agreement and the assignment shall have no further force and effect. So I can send you a notice to perform if you don't do what you said you were going to do, whether that be the pre-qualification or whatever. Like you don't qualify for the same terms, or you didn't provide me with all the documents initialed and acknowledged by the new person. Consideration for assignment. Buyer has received or will receive consideration from assignee in the amount of, I have to, for example, tell the seller if, let's say that I'm an agent, and some agents do this, right? We see this great chance for an investment. And so we want to lock it up, but we're not sure if it's going to be our investment or not. So we write an offer, we get it accepted, and then we pitch it out to investors and say, hey guys, I got this great deal, investors. I'll assign the deal to you. Just, pay me a little bit of a finder's fee and we move on. Okay. So I buy this house for $500,000 because it's a good deal. And I find an investor, and the investor says, yeah, I want it. So I go to do this assignment and they're going to pay me for that assignment, for getting out of it, for finding the deal for them, finder's fee. I have to disclose it to the seller. If I do not disclose that I got paid to the seller, then I am in breach of the contract, and then I could be in a lot of trouble because that seller, if they find out that I made money on top of the sale of their house, right? Because I offered them $500 and they accepted that. They're still going to sell it for $500, but I made $10,000 on the side, which means that the new assignee technically paid $510,000 for it, which means that by me not disclosing that I did that, I defrauded my seller of $10,000. So I have got to disclose that to them. Now, they might not care. If I tell them the truth, it's like, hey, listen, I'm going to find somebody else that's going to pay $500,000 for this, now that you've accepted my offer, and they're probably going to pay me something. If they're cool with it, then you disclose it, they sign off, and everything is cool. Now, if you check the box, though, down here that says buyer has not received any monetary consideration from assignee for this assignment, and you did, you just lied. And I know that people are going to say, but I don't want to tell them that we're paying money to assign it. Like, it doesn't matter. You have to do it. And if you have a feeling that they won't accept your assignment because you're getting paid for that assignment, then you're probably right. And if you hide it from them, then you're lying to them, which means you're cheating your own clients. So just know that any assignment, you've got to disclose if you're getting paid and how much you're getting paid. They got to know it. And if they agree to it, cool. If they say, no way, why would you get $10,000? Why do you get anything? And you either don't make the assignment and close the deal yourself, or, you figure out some other way that you can get compensated by the seller, by the investor or who the assignee that's picking it up. But you have to make that disclosure. Please don't think you can say, I'm not getting paid, get paid. And if they find out somehow that you got paid, it's going to be a problem. Okay? So don't lie. Don't commit fraud. Assignee represents for the benefit of seller that assignee ratifies and approves as assignee's own acts all prior approvals and acts of buyer pursuant to the agreement upon up to and including the date of this assignment. They're just saying, like, whatever you guys agreed upon, I get it. I know what it is, and I'm assuming that I'm good. Assignee assumes and agrees to perform and observe all of the obligations and covenants of buyer and the agreement to be performed after the date of this agreement. So whatever was going to be the responsibility of the buyer to complete after you sign this is now the assignee's responsibility. Buyer acknowledges and agrees that notwithstanding seller's agreement to this agreement, This assignment, buyer is not released from any obligations or covenants under this agreement. Any other terms that you put on there that you want to put. Without releasing buyer from any obligations or covenants under the agreement and preserving all rights and remedies under the agreement in consideration of the covenants contained herein, seller consents to the foregoing assignment. Okay? It just means we're not changing anything. We're not relieving you of the stuff that you've agreed to in the past. The parties acknowledge and agree that they have been advised to review this assignment with a qualified California real estate attorney and or accountant prior to signing this assignment. The brokers and agents make no representation as to the propriety, adequacy, legality, or tax consequences of this assignment. Everybody signs. The assignee, like the buyers who are requesting the assignment, right, which is this case that we've talked about is me and Alvaro. We both sign it here and date it. Then I will sign it again as the assignee. I will sign it and date it again. And then the seller will sign and date it when they agree to it. If they don't agree to it, they're going to initial assignment not accepted and what the date is. Just like we did on the amendment of existing agreement terms, they're going to either sign and accept or they're going to reject it, and they have the right to reject it. Nothing says they have to do that assignment, that they have to agree to the assignment. Okay? Questions about the assignment of agreement addendum? Yes, Charlie, go ahead.
Hey, Kyle. So I saw that it said on one of the paragraphs that it has to be checked by a real estate attorney.
No, it doesn't have to be checked by an attorney. They're saying you have the right, you're advised that to make sure that everything is fine and you're not going to have any kind of tax or legal consequences by making this assignment, you have every one of our legal contracts in the NCAR says that they can have their attorney review it. It's not required. It's just saying,
okay,
hey, you're advised if you're concerned about legal and financial and tax consequences, have your attorney or your CPA review this. That's it. It's just a disclaimer, little CYA for everybody. All right, any other questions about the assignment of agreement addendum? Nope. Okay. Here's another one that doesn't get used enough or sometimes at all, the backup offer addendum. Okay, backup offer addendum. How many of you guys have submitted an offer, gotten a counter, responded to the counter, didn't get your offer accepted, and the listing agent says, hey, don't worry, I'm going to keep you as a backup? It's happened to all of us. Unless you get this backup offer addendum, you have zero. You got nothing. Them saying you're a backup offer is the same as them saying, hey, you got it, without sending you a signed purchase agreement, right? How many times have somebody told you, hey, you guys got it, and then you don't get anything, you call them and they go, oh, sorry, we got a better offer. Happens all the time. So unless you have this backup offer addendum signed by the seller and agreed to by your buyer, you guys have zero when it comes to backup offers. And if you're a listing agent and you're telling somebody that you're going to make them a backup offer, do the right thing and include this backup offer addendum in their counter offer. So let's say, for example, I'm the listing agent. I get an offer from you guys. I counter a multiple counter to everybody. You all respond to the multiple counter, and I accept one of the multiple counters, right? But I like 2 or 3 of the other offers that we got, not just the one we accepted. So what I do is I now do another multiple counter to those 3. And on multiple counter, I put on there for the backup offer, that's the best one. I send them backup offer addendum number 1, right? Or backup offer addendum, and say that they are in backup position number 1. And for the other one, I send them a seller's multiple counter with a backup offer addendum that states that they're backup number 2. And then for the third one, I send them a seller multiple counter that says they are backup number 3. And then backup number 1, 2, and 3 all sign and agree to my multiple counter offer, and they send it back. And then I sign and accept each one of theirs, or I sign backup offer number 1. I sign, like, okay, great, we got them. Okay. Now what happens is, if you look at here, is those are all accepted subject to the cancellation. So it says, this agreement is in backup position number 1 and is contingent upon written cancellation of any prior contracts and related escrows, prior transaction between seller and other buyers, and mutual release of the obligation to buy, sell, or exchange that property. Seller and other buyers may mutually agree to modify or amend the terms of prior transaction. So I know that I just told you guys accept all 3 of those if they sign and send them back to you. The reason is because backup number 1 is subject to the cancellation of the offer that I've already accepted. Backup number 2 is subject to the cancellation of the original escrow and backup number 1. And backup offer number 3 is subject to the cancellation of the original escrow, backup number 1, and backup number 2. You guys following? Go ahead, Charlie.
So what if, for example, you put on one of the contracts that it's backup offer number 1, and then you have backup offer number 2, but you, instead of accepting backup offer number 1, you
Nope.
accept
You can't do
back.
that. Can't do that.
Huh?
Nope. Can't do that. If backup offer number 1 finds out that you did it, you're now in breach of the contract. You're opening up your seller and yourself to a lawsuit for specific performance. You're in trouble.
Okay.
So no, you can't do that. If you're gonna do backup offers, follow the terms of the backup offers that you're doing. Okay, don't skip around. And that's the thing, is that's why first of all, probably none of you guys are going to use this, and you should. Secondly, is that's why when you hear someone tell you got a backup offer, just move on. Go look for other properties, because if they don't send you this, you got bupkis. You got nothing. You might as well just go try to find them another house. Because what's happening, if you tell your client you got a backup offer and they don't have this form to sign, at least showing them something, they're going to still hold on to they got a backup offer, and they're going to be hesitant to go look at other properties. You guys don't get it, and they tell you verbally but don't send you this. Don't tell your clients you're a backup. Just surprise them if the agent comes back and says to you, hey, guess what? We want to go back with you guys. Surprise them. But don't let them hold out hope that they have a backup chance for this. Okay? Cancellation rights. Buyer may cancel the agreement in writing at any time before the seller provides buyer copies of written cancellation release of prior transaction. So what they're saying is, hey, listen, anytime, you guys don't have to hang on and be backup number 3, backup number 2. You don't have to hang on. You can cancel at any time. For buyer or seller, if seller is unable to provide such written signed cancellations and releases to buyers by blank date, then either party may cancel the agreement. So like, for example, what I would suggest is you at least give your original buyer, the original buyer that you've accepted the offer, at least give them time to remove their contingencies, right? So figure out a date 17 days from the acceptance of your original offer and put that date in there. Okay, that's what I would do. Buyer's deposit. Now, you can have a buyer who has a backup offer put their deposit in escrow right now on acceptance if you wanted to. And that way you say, hey, if this one cancels, we go to you and say, hey, do you want it? And you say yes. You open you already have an escrow. You already have a deposit in escrow. I'm not telling you guys to do that. Please don't do that. Just leave it as the default, which is 3 business days after we tell you that the original offer was canceled and you guys agree to move forward. Okay, that's what we leave. The time period's the same way. They start after you canceled and you have full acceptance. Okay. Scope of broker duty. The parties agree that no real estate broker or agent involved in this transaction has advised either party whether the prior transaction was legally canceled or if the party is legally entitled to the deposit. If this backup offer attached to a purchase agreement or counteroffer, it expires with that other document. Otherwise, this backup offer shall be deemed revoked unless signed and delivered back to the party initiating it by 5 p.m. on the 3rd day after it's signed. Okay, so if I put it with a counteroffer, when that counteroffer expires, this form expires. If we're doing it outside of that, we didn't do it to a counter, we just said, hey, by the way, I know that you accepted the terms of the account already, but we accept another offer, but here's a backup offer addendum. They just send you the backup offer addendum and you sign and return it. You got 3 days from the date you receive it or from the date they sign it and send it to you. Now, the reason that you don't want to do it outside of a counteroffer is because if you didn't counter them, if they didn't agree to all the terms and beforehand, then even if they become your backup, if they step in to become the new buyer, you still have to counter and make sure the terms are correct. So you got to do it as part of a counteroffer so all the other terms are agreed to. This is what you would use for the cancellation. If the seller was canceling, seller acknowledges being advised to seek advice, qualified California real estate, blah, blah, blah. This agreement is now in full effect. You're signing here. That's when the seller is telling that the buyer that the one that you were backup offer number 1 to, that deal canceled. And so I'm acknowledging it and sending this to you, and the buyer is going to initial saying that we got it, that we know that we are now the buyer in this transaction. Okay? Questions about that? So we have a few left that we will cover next week. But any questions on the ones, the amendments and addendums that we have covered so far? Anybody? No? All right. Well, I didn't want to get into another one because we only have about 5 minutes left or so. So I wanted to make sure we have time for each one. I don't want to get in the middle of one and try to finish it next week. So no questions. You guys don't have any questions, any concerns, any issues, any confusion about any of the forms that we just covered? Great. I'm either an amazing teacher or you guys are afraid to ask me questions. I appreciate all of you guys being here.
Kind of quick question.
Yes, Virginia. Yes.
Just really quick. So on the backup, when there's an opportunity for us to submit the backup offer with an offer, because I've had it where, I call and they've already accepted an offer. I say, would you allow me to come in as a backup? Can I submit it with my offer?
You can. The problem is, the issue is that you're still they haven't agreed to all your terms. So it's usually better to do it as part of it. But yeah, absolutely. If the listing agent tells you, hey, you're going to be our backup offer, go ahead. Now, the problem is you don't know how many backup offers they have, right? So you could submit it with saying you're backup number one, and the amount of days that the property that they have to give you the acknowledgement that it's canceled. They're probably going to have to counter you back and change if you're not counter number one or backup number one, right? So I mean, I would, just so they see what it is, because I think a lot of listing agents don't use it and don't know about it. So even if you submit as a backup offer and they counter you, they're probably not gonna put this form in. So yeah, sure, do it, at least to get that part of the process started.
Thank you.
Darwin, I saw that you also unmuted. Did you have something?
Yes, boss. Quick question. Like, it would be more recommended when you mentioned about doing the signing, DocuSign or wet sign. It is better DocuSign, though we have proof that they have a copy, because happened to me that I gave copies to them and they come out and say, oh no, I didn't have a copy when I do that wet sign. So it would be better, or do both at the same time?
I prefer the digital signatures because there is no question that it was done, right? It shows who it was delivered to, the whole thing. But
Right.
They can make the same argument. I never got the email of the completed DocuSign, right? They could make the same argument as if, hey, you didn't actually leave me a copy of this signed one that was wet signatures. They could do the same thing. So it's like 6 of one, half dozen the other, but it's a harder fight. It's a harder argument when you do digital signatures because it has the security tags, and it does show that it was sent to their email and things like that. So, it's preferable to do digital signatures, but I totally understand if you guys are still doing wet, just make sure that you're doing everything you can to get them a copy. Okay.
But it's more recommended to do it like you were saying, DocuSign.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation, but I know that not everybody has that. So, but yes, that's preferable. Anybody else? Any other questions, concerns, comments, anything? Nope. All right. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. Go out there, be productive. I will see you in a week.